The crystal glasses chimed with a delicate, expensive sound, a sound I knew intimately because I had paid for them. I had paid for everything. The private dining room at La Lumiere, the 17-course tasting menu, the vintage champagne currently bubbling in my sister's flute. It was all a gift from me, Emily Wilson, the family's designated ATM and, apparently, its greatest disappointment. My sister, Charlotte, was radiant. She was always radiant. With her perfectly coiffed blonde hair, a smile that could charm a snake, and a degree in art history from a prestigious university, funded by me, she was the family's shining star. Her fiancé, Mark, a blandly handsome man from a good family, sat beside her, looking every bit the proud partner. He was an investment banker, a detail my parents never failed to mention. They saw him not as a man Charlotte loved, but as a successful acquisition, a final validation of her worth. "I just want to thank everyone for being here," Charlotte began, her voice dripping with practiced sincerity. "This has been the most magical time of my life, planning our dream wedding." She beamed at Mark, who squeezed her hand. "And it wouldn't be possible without our incredible family." Her eyes swept the table. They landed on our parents, who were practically glowing with pride. Our father, a retired surgeon, had always valued prestige and traditional paths to success. Our mother, a woman whose main occupation was managing social appearances, saw Charlotte's wedding as the pinnacle of her life's work. "To Mom and Dad," Charlotte continued, raising her glass. "For giving me the confidence to follow my dreams and for always, always believing in me." My parents preened. I took a slow sip of my champagne, the bitter taste of irony mingling with the crisp notes of apple and pear. My dreams? When I dropped out of law school to start my own graphic design firm, they'd called it a phase. When my firm, Pixel and Quill, took off and I made my first million, they'd called it luck. When I offered to pay for Charlotte's master's degree so she wouldn't have to take out loans, my father had patted my hand and said, "It's the least you can do, Emily. It's good you found a way to be useful with that computer hobby of yours." Now, Charlotte's gaze slid to me. Her smile tightened, just a fraction, but I saw it. It was the same look she gave me when she borrowed my favorite sweater and returned it stained, or when she'd tell our parents a story that conveniently left out her own fault and highlighted mine. "And of course," she said, her voice taking on a teasing, saccharine tone, "a toast to all the Wilsons." She paused for dramatic effect, her eyes locking onto mine. "Cheers to the Wilsons, except for Emily, the failure of the family who only has money." The words hung in the air, sharp and glittering as shattered glass. For a heartbeat, there was silence. I expected my parents to intervene, to chide her, to show some semblance of fairness. Instead, they laughed. It wasn't a small chuckle. It was a full, hearty laugh. My father tipped his head back, his face red with amusement. My mother let out a delicate, tittering sound, covering her mouth with her hand as if Charlotte had just told the most charmingly witty joke. Mark, ever the sycophant, grinned and clinked his glass against Charlotte's. In that moment, something inside me didn't just break, it vaporized. It was the last, frayed thread of hope that they would ever see me. Not my bank account, not my utility, but me. Emily. The girl who had stayed up all night helping Charlotte with her university applications. The daughter who paid off their mortgage without being asked. The sister who was funding a $500,000 wedding so her successful sibling could have her perfect day. They saw me as a failure. A failure who only had money. The irony was so profound it was almost comical. My failure was the very foundation upon which their comfort and Charlotte's success were built. My hand was steady as I picked up my own glass. The laughter at the table died down as they saw me preparing to speak. Charlotte's smile was smug, triumphant. She thought I would make a self-deprecating joke, play along, be the good little failure and accept my role. I rose slowly from my chair, the plush velvet silent against my dress. I met my sister's gaze, then my mother's, then my father's. I saw no remorse in their eyes, only a smug, familial complacency. I raised my glass high. The champagne shimmered under the soft lights of the chandelier, another item whose rental I had covered. My voice was quiet, but it cut through the room with the precision of a scalpel. To the failure, I said, my eyes fixed on Charlotte. The failure who will stop paying for your wedding. The silence that followed was a different kind of silence. It was not a pause. It was a vacuum. The smugness on Charlotte's face collapsed into disbelief, then horror. My mother's smile froze and shattered. My father's jaw went slack. Mark's eyes widened, the calculation within them instantly shifting from social climbing to financial disaster. I didn't wait for a response. I placed my champagne flute back on the table with a soft, final click. I picked up my purse, turned my back on their stunned faces, and walked out of the restaurant. The cool night air hit my face, and for the first time in years, it felt like I could finally breathe. The cost of that dinner was astronomical, but the price of my freedom, I realized, was paid in full. The drive back to my penthouse apartment was a blur of traffic lights and street lamps smearing across the windshield. My hands were clamped so tightly on the steering wheel that my knuckles were white. I wasn't crying. The hurt was too deep for tears, it had settled in my bones as a cold, hard resolve. The laughter. It wasn't just Charlotte's cruel jibe, but my parents' echoing laughter that played on a loop in my head. That sound was the soundtrack to my entire life, the gentle, constant dismissal of everything I was in favor of what they wanted me to be. My apartment was my sanctuary. A minimalist space with clean lines, floor-to-ceiling windows, and a panoramic view of the city skyline. It was a space I had built, designed, and paid for with my computer hobby. It was a testament to my failure. I walked straight to the bar, poured myself a generous glass of whiskey, and sank onto my sofa. My phone started buzzing almost immediately. Charlotte. I let it go to voicemail. A minute later, it buzzed again. My mother. I ignored it. Then my father. Then Mark. The barrage was relentless, a digital assault born of panic. I took a long, slow sip of whiskey, the burn a welcome distraction. I thought back to the beginning. My father, a man of science and tradition, had never understood my fascination with the fluid, chaotic world of digital art and branding. To him, success was a ladder with clear rungs: undergraduate, medical school, residency, partnership. My decision to leave law school was not just a career change, it was a personal affront, an abandonment of the legacy he had envisioned. My mother's disappointment was more aesthetic. She wanted a daughter she could boast about at her country club luncheons. My daughter, the lawyer, had a beautiful ring to it. My daughter, the graphic designer, sounded flimsy, artistic, and worst of all, middle class. The fact that I was now wealthier than all of them combined was a detail they found inconvenient and slightly vulgar. They accepted the money, but they refused to grant it the respect they'd have given a smaller salary earned in a more respectable profession. The phone buzzed with a text message from Charlotte. "What the hell was that, Emily? You ruined the entire night." Another one followed instantly. "Are you serious? You can't be serious. Mom is hysterical." And another. "Pick up the phone. Now. This isn't a joke." I smiled grimly. It wasn't a joke. It was a declaration of independence. I set my whiskey down, walked over to my desk, and opened my laptop. The sleek machine hummed to life, my fingers flying across the keyboard. It was time to dismantle the wedding, piece by digital piece. First, the venue. The grand, historic Ashton Estate, booked for a Saturday in June. The non-refundable deposit was already paid, a cool $50,000. I'd lose that, but the remaining balance of $200,000 was due next week. I pulled up the contract, found the contact information for the events manager, and drafted a polite, firm email. Subject: Cancellation Wilson/Thompson Wedding, June 12th. Dear Ms. Albright, please be advised that I will be withdrawing all further funding for the Wilson/Thompson wedding, scheduled for June 12th. As per our agreement, all future payments were to be made from my account. This email serves as official notice that no further payments will be forthcoming. The primary booking parties, Charlotte Wilson and Mark Thompson, will now be your sole point of contact regarding the outstanding balance. Sincerely, Emily Wilson. I hit send. A small, vicious part of me imagined Miss Albright's phone call to Charlotte in the morning. Next, the caterer. A celebrity chef whose services cost more than my first car. Another email. Click. The florist, who was planning to construct a living waterfall of orchids. Another email. Click. The photographer, the 10-piece band, the couture dressmaker in Paris where Charlotte's dress was being custom-made. Email after email, a digital guillotine severing the financial ties that had bound me to their expectations. With each click of the mouse, I felt lighter. Finally, I pulled up my online banking. There was a joint savings account I had opened with Charlotte years ago, a wedding fund I had been dutifully contributing to. She had never put in a single dollar. I had told her it was for her to use for vendor deposits and smaller expenses. There was still over $70,000 in it. I initiated a transfer of the entire amount back to my personal checking account. The reason for transfer? I typed, revoked gift. As I closed my laptop, a sense of profound calm washed over me. The buzzing of my phone had become background noise, the desperate bleeding of a world I no longer belonged to. I walked out onto my balcony, the city lights twinkling below like a fallen constellation. A new text message lit up my screen. It was from my mother. Emily, your father and I are deeply disappointed in your behavior. You have embarrassed this family. Whatever petty jealousy you feel towards your sister, you have a duty to see this through. You will call the venue and fix this in the morning. Duty. Jealousy. Petty. The same old words, the same old narrative. They couldn't even conceive that my actions weren't about jealousy of Charlotte, but about self-respect. They couldn't understand that my duty to myself finally outweighed my duty to their delusions. I held my finger over Charlotte's contact name, then my mother's, then my father's. I blocked them all. The silence that followed was absolute. It was the sound of a cage door swinging open. I was a failure who only had money. Fine. Let's see how the successes of the family fared without it. 3 days of silence were a balm to my soul. I worked, I met friends for dinner, I slept through the night without the familiar weight of familial expectation pressing on my chest. I felt like I was detoxing from a poison I hadn't even realized I'd been ingesting my entire life. The peace, however, was a fragile bubble, and I knew it was only a matter of time before they found a way to burst it. The attack came not at my home, but at my office. A place they had visited only once before, for a stilted, awkward tour where my father had asked my lead developer if he fixed computers. My assistant, Chloe, buzzed me through the intercom, her voice tight with alarm. Emily, your family is here. They don't have an appointment. Don't let them in, Chloe, I said calmly, my heart rate kicking up a notch. I tried, she whispered back. Your sister just walked past me. They're heading to your office now. I stood up just as my office door, frosted glass etched with the Pixel and Quill logo, swung open. There they were, Charlotte, her face pale and blotchy from crying, my mother, her expression a mask of cold fury, and my father, looking grim and imposing. They fanned out, creating a makeshift tribunal in the center of my workspace. How could you? Charlotte shrieked, her voice raw. She was holding her phone, waving it at me like a weapon. The Ashton estate called me. The caterer. The florist. They all said you canceled. You pulled the money from the wedding account. My dress, Emily. I have a final fitting in Paris next month. How am I supposed to pay for it? Her distress was performative and entirely self-centered. There was no apology, no acknowledgement of her insult, only outrage that the consequences of her actions had finally landed at her own feet. You seem to have answered your own question, Charlotte, I said, my voice level. You're supposed to pay for it. It's your wedding. This is not about money, Emily, this is about family, my mother interjected, stepping forward. Her voice was low and steely. You are deliberately trying to humiliate us. Do you have any idea how this looks? First, you storm out of a lovely family dinner, and now this? You are making a spectacle. The accusation was so breathtakingly hypocritical I almost laughed. A spectacle? I'm making a spectacle? You laughed, when your daughter called me a failure at a dinner I was paying for. You think the problem here is my reaction, not the abuse that caused it. It was a joke. Charlotte wailed. A stupid joke. You've always been too sensitive. A joke is something both people find funny, I shot back, my control beginning to fray. For years, I have been your safety net, your bank, your silent benefactor. I have paid for your education, your car, your apartment, this wedding, all while you and your parents looked down on me because I didn't follow the correct path. The joke was just the first time you were brave enough to say what you all really think to my face. My father, who had been silent until now, finally spoke. His voice was heavy with paternal disappointment, the tone he used when he was at his most condescending. Emily, this is unbecoming. You've made your point. You were hurt, we understand. Now it's time to be the bigger person. A family does not abandon each other over a few careless words. A few careless words? I repeated, my voice rising. This wasn't a slip of the tongue. This is the foundation of our entire relationship. You value her for her potential, for her prestige. You value me for my checkbook. You don't see me as a daughter, you see me as a resource. And I am tired of being mined. I walked around my desk, putting a physical barrier between us. Let me be very clear. This is not a negotiating tactic. The money is gone. The funding is stopped. It's final. Charlotte let out a strangled sob. My wedding. My perfect day is ruined. Your perfect day was being built on my failure, I said, meeting her eyes. If my money is so distasteful, so common, a product of my sad, failed life, then you should be relieved you no longer have to be sullied by it. Plan a wedding you can afford. Or better yet, that Mark can afford. He's the big success, isn't he? The investment banker? Surely he can cover the cost of some flowers. The jab hit its mark. I could see from the flicker in Charlotte's eyes that this was already a point of contention between her and her fiancé. Mark came for money, but he wasn't liquid, and he certainly hadn't planned on funding the lavish affair Charlotte had designed on my dime. You are no longer a part of this family, Emily, my mother said, her voice trembling with rage. It was her final, most powerful weapon. Banishment. The words that should have devastated me brought only a sense of relief. I haven't been a real part of this family for a very long time, I replied softly. You just made it official. Now, please leave my office. You are trespassing. My father took a step forward, his face a thundercloud. Don't you dare speak to your mother that way. Get out, I said, my voice ice. Or I will have security escort you out. For a long moment, nobody moved. The three of them stood there, defeated but defiant, unable to process this new reality where their emotional leverage had no currency. Finally, my mother turned on her heel and marched out, her back ramrod straight. Charlotte shot me a look of pure hatred before following her, sobbing dramatically. My father was the last to leave. He paused at the door, his hand on the frame. He looked at me, at my office, at the life I had built, and for a fleeting second, I saw something other than anger in his eyes. It looked like confusion, as if he was seeing me for the first time and couldn't make sense of the picture. Then it was gone, replaced by the familiar mask of disappointment. He shook his head slowly and walked out, closing the door behind him with a soft, final thud. I sank into my chair, the adrenaline leaving me weak. The siege was over. I had held my ground. But as I looked around my quiet, empty office, I couldn't ignore the hollow ache of the victory. I had won my freedom, but the cost was my entire family. In the weeks that followed the confrontation at my office, a new kind of normal began to set in. The silence from my immediate family was absolute, a digital and emotional void. At first, it was unnerving, like the phantom limb of a life I'd amputated. But slowly, it became peaceful. My work thrived with my renewed focus. I took on a challenging new project, a complete rebranding for a promising biotech firm, and lost myself in the creative process. I reconnected with old friends, the ones who had known me before Pixel and Quill, the ones who liked me for my terrible puns and not my tax bracket. One evening, I received an unexpected call from a number I didn't recognize. I almost ignored it, but curiosity got the better of me. "Emily," a warm, familiar voice asked. "It's your Aunt Carol." Aunt Carol was my mother's younger sister, the bohemian of the family. She was a potter who lived in a small coastal town and had always treated my artistic ambitions with respect rather than disdain. "Aunt Carol," I said, a genuine smile spreading across my face. "It's so good to hear from you." "I can imagine you're not hearing from many of us right now," she said with a dry chuckle. "I spoke to your mother. Got an earful, as you can guess. I just wanted to call and say, good for you." The validation was so unexpected it brought tears to my eyes. "Really? Really," she affirmed. "They've been treating you like a walking bank for years, honey. Your mother, I love her, but she's so caught up in what the neighbors think she's forgotten how to see what's right in front of her. And your father, he's just like his own father. Believes if you can't put a fancy title on it, it isn't worth anything." We talked for over an hour. She told me the gossip she'd been hearing. Charlotte and Mark were in a tailspin. They had been forced to cancel the Ashton estate and were scrambling to find a new, much cheaper venue. The couture dress had been abandoned. The guest list had been slashed from 300 to 50. The living waterfall of orchids had been downgraded to baby's breath from the local supermarket. "Apparently, Mark is not taking it well," Carol said, a note of grim satisfaction in her voice. "It seems he was in love with the idea of the wedding as much as he was with Charlotte. The big society event, the photos in the glossy magazines, a backyard barbecue with a cash bar doesn't have the same appeal." Friction had erupted between the happy couple. Charlotte was blaming Mark for not having enough money, and Mark was blaming Charlotte for being a spoiled brat. My parents had tried to dip into their retirement savings to salvage some of the grandeur, but it was a drop in the ocean compared to what I had been willing to spend. "They're discovering a hard truth," Aunt Carol mused. "Money you haven't earned yourself is the easiest to spend. It's all just numbers on a page. When it's your own sweat and sacrifice, every dollar has a weight to it." After the call, I felt a strange sense of detachment from their drama. It wasn't my problem anymore. It was a fire I had no obligation to put out. A few days later, I got a text message from an unknown number. "Emily, it's Charlotte. I know you blocked me. This is my friend's phone. Listen, I'm sorry if what I said hurt you. I was stressed and I was trying to be funny and it came out wrong. But you have to admit you overreacted. My wedding is completely ruined. Everything is a disaster. Mark and I are fighting constantly. You made your point. Can we please just stop this and you can fix it? I'll tell everyone you're the hero who saved the day. Please." I read the message twice. It was a masterclass in non-apology. "I'm sorry if you were hurt. You overreacted. You fix it." She still didn't get it. She saw my actions as a tantrum, a power play that had gone on long enough. She still saw me as a tool to be used, dangling the hero role as a reward for my compliance. I deleted the message without replying. That weekend, Aunt Carol drove into the city to visit. We went to an art gallery, a place my mother would have found drafty and pointless, and then had dinner at a noisy, wonderful Thai restaurant. "You look different," she said, studying me over a plate of pad cew. "Lighter." "I feel lighter," I admitted. "It's like I've been carrying a heavy backpack my whole life and I just took it off." "That backpack was filled with their expectations," she said wisely. "And it was never your burden to carry. You know, for all they call you a failure, you're the only one in that house who ever truly built something of her own. They're just living in the past, propping up an image. You're living in the future you created." Her words settled something deep inside me. She was right. My success wasn't just the money, it was the act of creation, of forging my own path against their disapproval. That was a victory they could never understand and, therefore, could never take away. My new life was taking shape, built not on blood ties and obligation, but on genuine connection and mutual respect. I had my friends, I had Aunt Carol, I had my work that I loved. I was laying the foundation for a new kind of family, a chosen one. And as for the Wilsons, the cracks in their perfect facade were beginning to show, and I was no longer there to plaster over them with my money. They were on their own. The day of Charlotte's wedding arrived. It was a sunny Saturday in June, the kind of day that would have been perfect for a grand affair at the Ashton estate. I knew the date, of course, but it held no power over me. I hadn't received an invitation, and the relief was immense. I was officially in exile, and I had never felt more at home in my own skin. Instead of moping or feeling excluded, I decided to celebrate my own independence. I invited Aunt Carol and a handful of my closest friends to my apartment for a failures feast. I ordered catering from a fantastic new fusion restaurant, bought several bottles of excellent champagne, not the vintage kind my father would approve of, but one I personally loved, and created a playlist of upbeat, empowering music. The atmosphere was light and joyful. My friends, who had been my staunchest supporters through this whole ordeal, toasted my courage. Aunt Carol, a glass of Prosecco in hand, told hilarious, slightly scandalous stories about my mother's youth. We laughed, we ate, and for the first time, I felt like the host of a celebration that was truly about connection, not performance. Around 8 o'clock, as the sun began to set, casting a golden glow across my living room, the intercom buzzed. We all fell silent. Chloe, my assistant, never patched calls through to my private residence. It had to be someone at the front door. I walked over and pressed the button. "Hello?" A man's voice, hesitant and familiar, came through the speaker. "Emily? It's your father." My heart did a painful lurch. My friends and Aunt Carol looked at me, their expressions a mixture of concern and support. "What do you want?" I asked, my voice colder than I intended. Can I come up? Just for a minute? Please." The please was what got me. I had never heard my father say that word to me in my entire life. Against my better judgment, I buzzed him in. Aunt Carol gave my shoulder a reassuring squeeze. "You want us to leave?" "No," I said, my resolve hardening. "Stay. I want you here." A few minutes later, there was a soft knock on the door. I opened it to find my father standing there, looking utterly out of place. He wasn't in a tuxedo, as I'd expected, but in a simple suit that looked rumpled and tired. His face was etched with a weariness I had never seen before. He stepped inside, his eyes taking in the scene, the laughing friends, the scattered plates of food, the joyful mess of a real party. He looked towards the window, where Charlotte's wedding was likely winding down in a suburban backyard somewhere. "The wedding is over," he said, his voice quiet. "Charlotte and Mark are going on a mini-moon to a motel 2 towns over. That's all they could afford." I didn't say anything. I just waited. It was. He struggled for the words, unpleasant. Charlotte was miserable the whole time, complaining about the cheap wine and the plastic chairs. Mark looked like he wanted to be anywhere else. I saw them arguing by the garage. She was crying about her dress, and he told her she was acting like a child. He finally looked at me, and his eyes were clear, stripped of their usual arrogance. All day, I watched her. And I realized, we created a monster of entitlement. We praised her for things she didn't earn and criticized you for things you did. We celebrated the image of success, but we completely ignored the reality of it. He took a shaky breath. "When you started your company, I called it a hobby. I didn't understand it, so I dismissed it. It was easier to do that than to admit my daughter was smarter than me in a world I knew nothing about. That's not an excuse. It's just the ugly truth." My own eyes began to burn. "I am so sorry, Emily," he said, and the words were not forced or manipulative. They were heavy with genuine remorse. "For the toast. For the laughter. For all the years before it. I was wrong. I am proud of you. I'm so incredibly proud of what you've built. And I am ashamed that it took you cutting us off for me to finally see it. A tear escaped and traced a path down my cheek. I hadn't realized how desperately I'd needed to hear those words until they were spoken. Aunt Carol stepped forward gently. "John," she said to my father. "It's a start." He nodded, looking humbled. He didn't stay long. It was too awkward, the wound too fresh. But as he left, he turned at the door. "Your mother, she's not there yet. She's too worried about the fallout. But I'll work on her. And I'll work on me. If you'll let me." I simply nodded, unable to speak. After he was gone, the party slowly wound down. My friends, sensing the emotional gravity of the moment, gave me hugs and left me with quiet words of support. Soon, it was just me and Aunt Carol, looking out at the glittering city lights. The path to reconciliation with my father would be long and uncertain. My relationship with my mother and sister might be irreparable. But something fundamental had shifted. The truth had been spoken, and the power dynamic had been permanently rewritten. I picked up an untouched bottle of champagne. I popped the cork and poured 2 glasses, handing one to my aunt. I raised my glass, just as Charlotte had done all those weeks ago. But this toast was different. There was no bitterness in it, no revenge. Only a hard-won peace. "To new beginnings," I said, my voice clear and strong. "To found families. And to defining our own success." Aunt Carol clinked her glass against mine. "To the failure," she said with a loving smile, "who turned out to be the greatest success of them all." We drank, and the champagne tasted like victory. Not victory over them, but victory for myself. I was the author of my own story now, and this was just the first page.